And the Republican governors of Texas and Florida vow they'll keep sending migrants to Democrat-led cities. Up next, I'll speak to the leader of an organization that helps immigrants and refugees about why she says these stunts harm both the migrants and our country's reputation. Well, Florida's governor is turning up the heat on his migrant relocations, vowing that what we saw this week in Martha's Vineyard is just the beginning. Governor Ron DeSantis also said he will spend every penny from his $12 million relocation budget to send more migrants to liberal areas. Priscilla Alvarez joins us now for more. Priscilla.
Pamela, the ongoing feud between Republican governors and the Biden administration over immigration policy escalated this week, but Florida Governor Ron DeSantis now jumping into the mix and sending some 50 migrants to Martha's Vineyard. Meanwhile, Texas Governor Greg Abbott sent migrants to the residence or in front of the residence of Vice President Kamala Harris. Now, the White House was very critical of these actions this week, saying that it was a political stunt, and the Department of Homeland Security also weighing in, saying the lack of coordination between these states and the cities where they're sending migrants can, quote, wreak havoc. And that has been the case to a degree. The city officials, both in Martha's Vineyard and in Washington, D.C., as well as New York and Chicago, have been trying to shore up resources to help those asylum seekers that are sent by the states of Texas, Arizona, and now Florida. Now, the Biden administration has been grappling with an increasing number of migrants at the U.S.-Mexico border for months now, and they met yesterday to discuss support along the border as well as funding. Now, this was a meeting that a White House official told us was previously planned, but a source familiar with discussions also tells me that the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Justice lawyers are discussing litigation options regarding the movement of migrants out of state by Republican governors. But those governors showing no indication of standing down. Just this morning, Texas Governor Greg Abbott sent migrants to Washington, D.C. again.
She is the president and CEO of Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service, and she previously served in the Obama White House as policy director for First Lady Michelle Obama and at the State Department. Krish, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it. So I want to go to this tweet that you put out saying, nobody wins in the cruelty contest between DeSantis, Ducey, and Abbott. Asylum seekers, including children, legally crossing the border, had to flee the only home they've ever known. Shame on all those who would exploit vulnerable migrants for naked political theater. Those are some pretty strong words.
Well, I think it's just sad when you see what's happening. I mean, we're talking about children and families who are fleeing communist dictators, the kinds of leaders that Governor DeSantis, Governor Abbott have railed against. They flee for their lives because they have no other choice, and they come to the U.S. They go through the process. They seek out legal authorities. They get documented. They get legal paperwork to file their asylum claims. And the idea of shipping them with duplicitous lies, claiming that they're going to get housing, social services, jobs, lying about their final destinations, and then trying to dump them in an isolated island. It's just a tragedy, and it's clearly a political ploy. Of course, that was not the end of the story, and I think it was amazing to see how Martha's Vineyard, the local communities, rallied together to give them a hero's welcome.
It feels personal to you, right? Given what your family went through.
It does. And, of course, Sri Lanka is still in the news. I know when my parents fled what was a country on the brink of civil war because we were part of the ethnic and religious minority. They fled when I was 9 months old. My brother was 3. They didn't feel like they had a choice. They fled for the same reason parents flee, because they want to protect their children and they want to give them a better life.
Texas Governor Abbott is defending the migrant relocations. He said they were not misled. Let's listen.
Everybody that Texas has moved, they signed an authorization to go to the destination that we drove them to. And so there's been 0 people that Texas has misled.
So he says 0 people were misled by Texas. Do you believe him?
Based on the accounts that we've heard from the migrants, whether they were going to D.C. or to Martha's Vineyard, it doesn't seem accurate what he is suggesting. Some of these folks actually have legal cases where they need to show up in Texas in a month's time. It's clear that they don't, they sign these forms because they are hopeful that there's going to be services when they arrive, but they're arriving and they're just dumped on the side of the road with nothing because they're fleeing these countries, taking month-long journeys, and all they have are the clothes on their backs.
What do you say to conservatives who say, look, call it what you want, you can call it a stunt, But the overall purpose here is for blue states to understand what red states are going through with overwhelmed communities at the border. And hopefully they will finally do something about the border crisis now. What do you say to them?
I agree that immigration is a federal issue and it does require a national solution. No single state can solve immigration alone. But I think it's important to understand what they're doing. They're creating a crisis where one doesn't exist. There's infrastructure. My organization, for example, serves asylum seekers in Texas, Arizona, New Mexico. We're not overrun by asylum seekers there. What they're doing, and especially we saw it in Martha's Vineyard, is they're taking people from places where there's existing infrastructure and sending them to places where there's not with no advance notice because they hope those communities will get flat-footed. And I think the final thing I would say is, look, this is a time where the U.S. should take advantage of the fact that people risk their lives to come here. We pay a price premium, whether it's inflation, whether it's the 11.2 million jobs that are going unfilled, because last year we had the lowest rate of immigration to the country since 2010. We're hurting ourselves in these political shenanigans.
The White House has held meetings about this, trying to figure out what to do, how to handle it. If this is getting the attention of the White House the way it is, are you concerned that this will only fuel these efforts by these conservative governors?
I am worried because, it seems like one party views this as a wedge issue where they can score political points, and the other party views this as their Achilles heel, and they don't want to talk about it, especially in advance of the midterm. And the problem is that the reality, what we're seeing at the southern border and otherwise, it's not going to go away. My hope is that the White House will recognize that the administration can do things. For example, the DC mayor asked the National Guard twice, and both requests were rejected. The federal government can put resources to this issue, but likewise they have to recognize there needs to be coordination. If you take the asylum, the refugee system, we have a national system where we work with local communities, we recognize whether a family has a U.S. tie, and we will make a collective effort on where that family should go. But with the asylum system, it's ad hoc, and there's no reason for why the federal government, but also Congress, need to play a role. It's a sad reality that for 30 years, we've not had any major immigration reform.
And when asked whether the border is under control, the White House said it's currently fixing a broken system. It's going to take some time. That's what we heard from the White House press secretary. But the bottom line is the immigration system is broken. It has been broken for a long time. What is it going to take to fix it?
A miracle? I think maybe what gives me hope is less than 10 years ago, thanks to the leadership of the Gang of Eight, we were actually able to get 68 votes in the Senate for real immigration reform. That wasn't that long ago. But what we need to resurrect is the Republican leadership that we have seen in the past. You used to have border state political leaders like John McCain and George W. Bush consistently support immigration reform. That's what we need to see today. And we also need to see President Biden recognize that immigration is the strength of our country. It's not an issue to shirk away from. And just as we've seen bold action on climate crisis, on infrastructure, that's what we need to see on immigration.
All right, Krish, thank you so much for coming on, sharing your perspective.